What's up, gangsters? It is, unfortunately, for only the second time this year, time for one of my favorite kind of videos, which is a finished project. And this time it is the Tamiya 1/32 scale Spitfire that you can see right here. And yes, I finally get to do the ritual discarding of the instructions. It's like my favorite part of a project, when I get to throw away the instructions and the box. That's like a little ritual that I do when I finally finish one up. And this one's been a long time in the making. I don't know if if you guys keep up with my nonsense. I can't even remember how long ago it was that I did part one of this usual two-part build review thing, but it's been a while because it is almost the end of August 2019, and I started this one right around the same time in November. So I mean, this has been running for a solid 8 or 9 months, whatever that is. 9 months, 10 months. My math is terrible. Anyway. Close to a year by the calendar, and well over 250 hours by the clock, which I wouldn't normally keep track of, but this was a commission project, so I kind of had to, just to see how badly my business case would fail. I think I probably ended up making like 35 cents an hour on this one, so no, not quite that bad. But, this is not the kind of thing that you do to pay the bills. At least I don't. It's fun if somebody wants to throw some money at me every now and then, and I certainly am flattered if somebody appreciates my work as much as the owner of this project does, but I don't get too hung up on the business case. It's just one of those things. Anyway, enough babbling. This is, as usual, the point where it's time to do the slideshow, and this one is going to be kind of a long slideshow, even by my standards. It's like almost 50 photographs, I think, and I was, thinking that was pretty self-indulgent. But then I stopped and thought about it for a second. I was like, you know what? I have put in a lot of energy, more energy on this project than anything I've ever done in model making. And there is no square half inch of this thing that has not been massaged in one way or another. And so, what the heck? I'm sure the guy who's paying for it will at least be happy to see all of these slides, and I hope you guys are too. So, here we go. Let's see what I was able to do with this thing. Okay, so there it was, and here it is. So let me get right into it. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about the kit. I think this was the first or second of Tamiya's large-scale aircraft models, and this is certainly the most popular one. I don't know if there is any other thing in model aircraft that has been written about or talked about or had as many videos made about it as this Tamiya 1/32 scale Spitfire. It's a very popular kit for very good reason. It's just like all of Tamiya's aircraft stuff. It's fantastically engineered. It's just a joy to assemble it because it just goes together so well. Everything fits really, really nicely, and nobody needs me to say any additional words about it that have not already been said, other than if you haven't built one already, you should definitely put it on your list. I did have a little bit of drama with the landing gear, but that really was more on me than on the kit. There was just a little bit of an interference there, and once I stopped and took a close look and figured that out, I got that resolved easily. The screw and wedge system that they use for the landing gear is a really, really sweet bit of engineering. It's it's got pretty tight tolerances like all their stuff does, but it results in a very strong, stable set of legs, which is always nice with an aircraft model like this. So other than that, this thing just really, as far as the assembly went, the assembly just proceeded very, very smoothly. Lots of fun. Now, if you're sharp-eyed, you've already figured out that I used some aftermarket stuff, and I do want to talk about that, at least for a second. I didn't use everything that's available aftermarket because not only was there not really any need to, in my opinion, but that would have been an extensive list. You could easily spend as much on aftermarket for one of these as you do on the kit itself. I don't know exactly how much I spent, but let me tell you what I got. So starting in the cockpit, I am using the Quick Boost entry door, which is really, really beautiful. The Tamiya part is not too bad, but this thing is just really, really beautiful. If you didn't see in the slideshow, just the detail on it and the fidelity is just really fantastic. And I used my favorite HGW cloth seat belts. They are really, they always look great. Their instructions are, a little sketchy sometimes, but they always look really good, and this is no exception. I am a huge fan of the Yahoo instrument panels, which, you can't really see all that well in a Spitfire model because it's, gets buried in there pretty far. But they're just, I'm not going to try to get where we can see it, but they just really are gorgeous, and they fit well. Love those things a lot. So there's that. Moving forward, I have used the Edward Brasson wheels underneath there. Not as many good things to say about those, unfortunately. It's just an unfortunate thing. I feel like that a lot of these resin aftermarket manufacturers just kind of phone it in on some things, and Fit in particular. These resin wheels, the fit is lousy. That's just really all there is to say about it. They have separate wheel inserts, so the wheel and the tire are separate, rim and tire, whatever you want to call it. And I understand why they want to do that. It makes it easy to do different versions, but you have to do the masking really no matter what. And it seems inevitable, especially with Edward, that the fit between the wheel and the tire is just really sloppy. There's a gap all the way around the rim that you have to go and fill in, which, it's not that big of a deal, but it's just irritating. Also with these, the axle, the hole that the axle is supposed to go in, not deep enough and overly large. So the wheel is just totally flopping around on there. And there's a flange on the bottom of the landing gear that's supposed to go into a circular depression on the back side of the wheel. That depression is too small, so the wheel won't even go on all the way. Fortunately, it goes on, well enough to where everything works out okay, but you're not going to dry fit it because it won't stay there. It just falls off because the fit's just so sloppy. Anyway, next thing is these quick boost exhaust stubs, which you can see are absolutely gorgeous. They give you some detail with the weld seam there that the kit parts don't. And the kit parts, even though they're slide molded so that you have the the outlet open, they have a sprue gate attachment right there where that weld seam is supposed to be. So that kind of screws you up if you really want that detail to be there. But that's where the nice things that I have to say about these quick boost exhausts is going to end, because what should have been an hour's work to install them turned into about 7 hours, and a lot of really foul language. It's another fail in terms of fit and engineering, product design, whatever you want to call it. Because what's supposed to happen is, with the kit parts, they've got a tab on the end of the stub that plugs into a nice slot in very typical Tamiya fashion. So you can plug it in there, run a little bit of extra thin, and bam, your exhaust is installed and perfectly positioned. And even the tab on the Tamiya part is not quite long enough. It could be twice as long, and it'd be just fine. And if these resin stubs had a tab on the end of them that was a solid 2 millimeters long, this would have been painless. But it has one that's about half the length of the already too short stub that's on the kit parts. So you get absolutely no positive engagement whatsoever. And installing them was a mind-numbing and stressful effort of putting a little wad of poster tack on the fuselage in about the right spot, then positioning the stub, as correctly as I possibly could, and then wicking a little bit of extra thin CA in there to get it in position, to get it locked, removing the poster tack, and then finish gluing it to make sure that it had a really solid joint. It was just a real ass whipping, and I was super pissed off by the time I was done. But one thing that helped me, and I know a lot of you guys are going to ask about this, is this wooden stand. This thing is really, really helpful. You can see this one is made by JH Models. It is, it's made out of this laser cut plywood. You punch it out and glue it together. And this one is, it does several different sizes of them, but this one is the part number 48801A. And it's good for 1/32 scale aircraft, or a twin engine 1/48 scale aircraft, or large jet. So super helpful, because when you got your model held on there with rubber bands, that enables you to just grab the stand, and as opposed to the model, do whatever kind of twirling around you need to do, and that makes life a whole lot easier for operations like putting in those stubs. And I probably shouldn't say this, I don't know, but I am actually working with a friend of mine. I won't say who yet, but we are designing a fixture system like this. I'm doing the engineering. He's going to do the manufacturing. We think. Anyway, we'll see what happens. We'll see if it works out. Hopefully there will be some interest in it. But at any rate, that covers all of the aftermarket bits that I attached to this thing. I think they were all, totally worth it. Yeah, some of them were more pain than maybe I felt like they should be, but they add to the overall look of the thing. So I'm pretty happy with that. Now, I did not build the rest of it out of the box, however. I spent a lot of time, about 40 hours in fact, adding detail to the cockpit and to the engine, both of which, as they come out of the box, are a really, really nice base for doing that kind of stuff. Tamiya, they do a really nice job of getting as much as is probably practically possible, molded in there. And they, it's intelligent like everything they do. And so you've got a good base for adding wires and hoses and cables and things like that, which I did quite a bit of. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about that because I covered a lot of this stuff sort of along the way in my 10 Minutes of Random series, where if I happened to be working on that particular thing when I felt like doing one of those videos, then I talked about it. But maybe if I'm careful, I don't want to break anything, obviously, but maybe you can see down inside there if the angle of the light is just right. You can see I made that oxygen hose by wrapping one lead wire around another. You can see there's some steel wire in there, some brass wire. I tend to really use only lead wire for most of my detailing stuff because it's just great in terms of how well it forms. It super glues really well, takes paint really well, and you can get it really cheap. Anyway, so I use lead wire for most of that stuff. But I also have brass wire and silver wire and steel wire and aluminum wire for situations where the material that I'm trying to duplicate is brass or aluminum or steel or whatever, and I can do a better job by using a different type of wire. I also, for stuff like there's if you look close, you'll see on the far side of the cockpit there is a steel wire in there. I don't know if it'll focus on it. There's a steel wire in there running underneath the oxygen hose. That's the release mechanism for the Sutton harness, so that the pilot could easily get loose when he needed to bail out. And that needed to be smaller than 10/1000ths of an inch, which is the smallest size of lead wire that I have. And so for stuff like that, I have smaller wire. I've been able to find myself wire sizes clear down to about 2/1000ths of an inch. The wire that they use to make heating elements for vapes can get really, really small. So you can look for some of that. It comes in like nickel, silver, or whatever. Anyway, that's really nice for making super, super small stuff like that. So anyhow, that's what all happened in the cockpit. I also spent about 40 hours detailing the engine, which we will get to a little bit later on because I'm going to pop these covers off. But I don't want to talk about that quite yet. I want to talk about the paint and so forth. So we'll come back to talking about the engine covers and the engine itself. Anyway, so a little bit. I'm not going to go into huge detail about everything, but a little bit about the paint and the story here. Whoops. Hello, camera. Drunken camera. Anyway, what's the story here? I know that's not going to come through in the pictures, and some of you are probably like, WTF, Pattison, because if you are a sharp-eyed Spitfire mafioso, you have already seen a couple of things that are making you possibly quiver with rage. Hopefully not. This is, I don't know, I don't want to call it a what if, but more of a might have been. And let me explain. So what I wanted was to depict an aircraft, and I just realized that I forgot one of the key things in the aftermarket list, but I'll come to that in a second. Anyway, I wanted to depict an aircraft that had been in service before D-Day, survived D-Day, and possibly went on to even finish the war. And so would have had lots of wear and tear on the airframe. The invasion stripes would have been, worn down a bit. We know that at some point after D-Day, that most, if not all, of the invasion stripes were removed from the upper surfaces of aircraft. But like all of this stuff, that's not universal. I wanted to keep them on top because they look cool, and it's part of the story. So, this might have been an aircraft that's depicted in the late 1944 time frame, and specifically, I wanted one that is from 602 Squadron. Now, why 602 Squadron? Well, because 602 Squadron's squadron code is LO. And I really wanted to do LOL for what I think should be obvious reasons. It's because it's kind of funny. It's kind of a play on words. John E. Johnson's Spitfire is JEJ because, as was frequently the case with wing leaders and squadron commanders and so forth, they use their initials as their squadron code as opposed to the actual squadron code. And the reason that I point that out is because JEJ is how Latin-speaking internet posters spell heh, which we spell as HEH. Anyway, I've always laughed about that, and I always thought it would be funny as shit to do a Spitfire that was LOL. And we know for a fact that 602 Squadron featured LOD, LOK, LOG, LOJ, LOM, LOW, LOX, and some others. I can't remember all of them. I did a bunch of research. So, given that these were, basically alphabetic, I feel like there's a high probability that LOL existed. Was it a Mark 9? Yeah, maybe, maybe not. We don't know. Was it MH708? Maybe, maybe not. MH708 was, in fact, a real aircraft that had a service history, kind of like what I was trying to depict here. I mean, the information that you can get for this kind of thing is pretty slim. I was able to find some stuff and feel like, okay, yeah, close enough. Why not? So, it is a real serial number. It is a possible real squadron code. And, they might have gone together. Anyway, that's kind of the story on that part of it. And, of course, I really liked the LOL because the real joke here is the red crowbar. Yeah, I know. The red crowbar is one of those modeling tropes that we don't know where it came from, but somewhere along the way, somebody decided that they were supposed to be red and put that in some, ancient Revell instructions or something like that. And we got red crowbars, when in fact, as far as I know, red crowbars didn't come along until well after World War II. But it's a fun thing. It makes me laugh because it goes right along with the LOL. So that's the story with the red crowbar. Now, a couple of other things about the way this thing is depicted. As I said, it's a D-Day aircraft. Now, it's pretty common with D-Day aircraft, at least in the RAF, that the invasion stripes were hand-painted. Now, if you want to start a fight on an internet model-making group, all you have to do is bring up the subject of invasion stripes, because somebody is going to pipe up and they're going to say, oh yeah, those things were all painted with mops and you know, brooms and buckets of house paint. Well, yeah, some of them were. Okay, sorry, I apologize. Apparently my yard is getting mowed, and anyway, hopefully that's not too loud. Anyway, yeah, some invasion stripes certainly were hand painted by the light of the moon if it was out on the night of June 5th, right before the invasion. That's a thing. That definitely happened. Were they all done that way? Absolutely not. There are no shortage of photographs showing perfectly masked and sprayed invasion stripes. But I didn't want to do that for two reasons. One is I feel like the hand and painted ones are a more interesting story. And two, because depicting hand painted invasion stripes at scale without it looking like you just don't know how to paint is one of those modeling challenges, one of those holy grail things, maybe, I don't know. But I could not resist, especially when I started trying it on my bench mules and testing it out and posting it in model making groups, and people were like, oh hell no, Pattison, that looks like ass. You can't do it. It's never going to look good. It's not going to work. There's no way you should even try it. Just forget about it. Yeah, again with the LOL, because that was like waving a red flag in front of the bull for me. I had to figure out a way to do it. I felt like it was really just a painting trick, and that like any other painting trick, that it could be figured out. So what I ended up doing, the sort of process that I developed for this, was that I laid out the stripes, and with masking tape, I masked off the black ones and the edges, and just ghost sprayed a very, very light thin layer of white, and then took the inside two pieces of tape off. That left me with kind of the ghost outline of the stripes. That gave me a pattern to follow for basically marbling, or whatever you want to call it, stripe basing, I don't know. But what I did is I came in and I sprayed an irregular pattern of light coverage of both black and white to give me the basic tone and a little bit of variability, because I figured out with my first test, it took me 4 tries, by the way, or maybe 3, I don't know, but it took me 2 or 3 tries to figure out how to do this. And the first one I tried to just hand paint them completely, did not work. That was a total fail. And a couple of people who were way smarter than me suggested that I airbrush the base layer, and that worked well. So I airbrushed the base layer to get the basic color down, then came along with Mission Models black and white and hand painted the stripes. I thinned the paint quite a bit using their thinner. I did not use the poly, and it laid down nice and thin, but it took like 3 layers to get it done. But hopefully the story tells itself effectively, and I have not oversold the shittiness of the paint. You know, those edges hopefully are just irregular enough, and the flaws, small enough that it looks in scale, and, people can look at it and say, oh yeah, that was obviously hand painted with a brush. So that's the story on the invasion stripes. Now, if you are super, super sharp-eyed, you are also saying WTF about the freedom dispensers. So let's talk about that. What the heck is going on there? Well, so here's what happened. I wanted to get the master brass cannon barrels, and so I ordered those, and I got them, and I wasn't really paying attention, and there's a lot to know about Spitfires, and for every Spitfire rule, there's an exception. And I was not paying a lot of attention. I didn't realize that what I had were guns for the E-wing Spitfire. Now, let me explain what that means if you're not familiar. Okay, so Spitfires were denoted like Mark 9C, Mark 9E, Mark 5B. That last letter of the code was meant to denote the type of wing that it had. Okay, so what the C wing was a wing that had the internal structure and plumbing for 2 Browning 303 machine guns out here in the end of each wing, as well as the Hispano 20mm cannon actually in this spot right here. Well, that was the C wing, and that was all good, but because the Browning 50 cal was so effective and we Americans were producing so many millions of them, the Brits were like, hey, maybe we could put a Browning 50 cal in this wing. But what they figured out was that when they did that not only did they have to switch the position around and put the Hispano on the outside, but now the wing was too heavy, and they had to remove the Browning 303s from the outboard stations. So what happened was, according to the reading that I've done, is that they figured this out, and some of this was done as a field mod by teams who were sent out from the factory to do it in the field, and maybe by a few really, ambitious and enterprising squadrons with really, gung-ho crew chiefs. Anyway, so that's how you could get a C-wing to E-wing conversion of a Mark 9. As it turns out, that however it got done, apparently by late 1944, most of the Mark 9s that were operating had been converted to the E-wing configuration. So that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to show that the 303s had been removed and that their ports had been taped and painted over, obviously not perfectly neatly, because, that's a thing. That happened. Whatever kind of paint was laying around. Anyway, so that's why you've got these weird-looking splotches and patches out here on the ends of the wing, and you've got this odd configuration of gun and cannon inboard. Now, as far as the blister here goes, I'm not at all certain if I got the right one on there. The truth is, again, I had picked the one from the Tamiya instructions that seemed appropriate and glued it firmly in place before I realized that I had the wrong brass hardware. And actually, I had glued the brass hardware in with the cannon inboard before somebody pointed out to me in one of my work in progress pictures that it was wrong, thankfully. And fortunately, I was able to unsuperglue things and, and put it in there correctly. So, but yeah, the blister may not be right. I don't know. Don't care. Doesn't matter. It could have happened that way because, like I said, for every Spitfire rule, there is an exception. Anyhow, so that's the story behind this whole thing. And that's how a large part of the hardest part of the painting happened. The rest of the paint, MRP, my usual favorite MRP lacquers, as always, they did a fantastic job. I did my usual black basing using the texture stencils. I used the sausage masking technique to get a sort of hard, not hard, soft, not soft edge on this camo. I mean, yeah, sure, you can freehand those. That's fine. That's not a hard thing to do. But I don't know. I wanted the look to be a certain way, and I felt like masking it was a good way to go. And also because that allowed me to do all of the operations to the paint that I wanted to do within each color. I basically painted all the gray sections freehand and then did the masking and did the green sections. And I felt like it was the most effective. So at any rate, that's all that. The painting or the weathering is all pretty much Winsor & Newton oils. The only place there's any pigment on this thing is on the tires. I use a little bit there. But for the most part, I've stopped using any kind of pigments on aircraft models. I just don't feel like they're as versatile or as easy to work with as oils are. But, you know, for dirty tires, they do still work pretty good. But lots and lots of oil paint rendering. Oh, here's another thing I forgot to mention about the story. You may have noticed these chalk marks on the props. Yeah, I have no idea what the hell those mean, but it is a thing. I've seen it in a number of my Spitfire reference photos. It's clearly got something to do with maintenance. Don't know, don't care, it's interesting. And I did those with a white or a light gray, I can't remember which, watercolor pencil. So, felt like that worked out pretty good. Now, speaking of markings and things like that, all of the large markings, the wing walk stripes, the insignia, the call letters, those were all masked and sprayed, but I had a few stencils I needed to put on there. And that was a little bit of a debate that I had with myself because, you know, if you go by the kit, there's a bunch of stencils. But if you go by reference photos, there's lots of questions about how many there actually need to be. And so I opted for just a few that I thought, you know, added a lot of value. Like, you know, showing where the invasion stripe paint was worn through and that walkway inboard or walkway outboard stencil showed up right there over the fuel filler. You know, the painting around that compartment door right there. I thought that was all pretty cool. Now, what I did not want to do, though, is use actual stencil decals unless I had to. So this was my first time to try the HGW wet transfer stencils, and they were had a little bit of a learning curve, but as you can see, I mean, they are just wonderful because there is absolutely no film whatsoever. And the way that these things work that enables them to do that is that what you get, I actually still have them sitting out here in the box. You get this sheet of, yeah, maybe I can dig them out here. You get this sheet of stencils. It looks pretty much like a normal decal sheet, right? Well, it's not. What happens is when you cut it out, you use some water to release it from the backing paper, and at that point it looks like a decal with a whole shit ton of carrier film, because basically this entire thing is carrier film. But not to worry, because what happens is you apply the stencil to your surface, you burnish it down, you give it, according to the instructions, 6 to 8 hours to dry, and then you peel the clear film off and the letters stay put. And you get exactly what you're seeing there. It's just fantastic. Now, one important step that I left out that's kind of non-intuitive and that screwed me up at first, this is a really important step that I will make sure you guys know about, and that is using some decal setting solution. Okay, so I'm talking about this in detail because it's kind of non-intuitive and it's critical. And I found that out because the first stencil I put on, when I peeled up the clear film, about half the damn letters came with it. That did not make me happy because that was obviously not how I saw it going in my head. And I've, digging around and after, again, some helpful commentary on Scale Modeler's Critique Group, I learned that there was a part of the instruction sheet that I had failed to find because, it was inside the folded up thing that shows you the location of all the markings, and I was like, I don't really need that. Tossed it in the box, and so therefore missed this very important bit of info. And they say that you should use You should spray the surface with a glossy varnish, or you don't need to do that. You can go straight on the paint. But they say that you should use Mr. Mark Softer by Guns. Okay, well that's a setting solution. And it was non-intuitive to me that since this is not actually a decal, and none of these were going over any kind of panel lines or rivets, that I would need a setting solution. But what they want you to do is put the setting solution on the surface first and then put the transfer on there, which definitely is not the way that you normally use a setting solution. Well, I didn't have any Mr. Mark Softer. I was unimpressed with it in my testing, threw it away, but I did have some Micro Sol, as well as several other setting solutions, and I figured, well, Micro Sol is about medium strong, I'll try that. So I did exactly as they said, brushed a little bit of it on, applied the stencil, burnished it, and actually it got down to where I could wait, like 3 or 4 hours and successfully peel the clear film off and have a perfect result. So, super cool. I really love the way that those turned out. And I was able to very carefully do the same trick that I do to decals with a little bit of sanding to make those letters look like some of them were kind of faded or rubbed off or whatever. But very, 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 very light sanding with some 3000 grit sanding sponge. Doesn't take much at all to start to erase those. So that's how I did that. And then, of course, those got buried underneath a layer of dull coat after I did all of my panel line washes. I like to do panel line washes, and whether I'm using Tamiya's panel line wash, ammo, or making my own with oils, I like to do it directly on MRP because it's shiny enough right out of the bottle that washes have no problem flowing on it, and they're super easy to clean up with mineral spirits. So once I did all the washes, then I buried everything under a layer of my favorite OG Ungloss, which is dull coat, mixed 50-50 with just cheap hardware store lacquer thinner. And then it was time to do the oils, and that was all, like I said, Winsor and Newton, and all that good stuff. Just doing oil paint rendering, and the techniques that I've talked about in other videos on that. The exhaust pipes were probably the most challenging aspect of the OPR because I was trying to create the tones and the way that the ash gets heavier as you move from front to back on a very small scale, and just working off of a photograph. And it took me a couple tries. Honestly, I did it once, erased it, and did it again, and finally got happy with it. But that was nothing compared to the number of times I did the exhaust stains, which ended up being, I think, 4 times, twice on each side. I lay down a base of very, very diluted MRP that I have mixed up for an exhaust stain. It's a mixture of black and brown and gray and about 70% lacquer thinner. And that gives me the basic shape. And I what I like to do is take the instructions, scale them up, draw the shape, and cut it out, and then stick that on there with blue tack to give me the basic outline to follow, because an exhaust stain like Spitfires and Mustangs and Tempests has a shape that's distinctive because of the way the air flows over the wing. And so that's how I get the basics of the stain, and then I would come back and do oils over the top of that to give me that kind of grayish, brownish, ashy look to it. Couple of mishaps that involved getting a rag with plenty of mineral spirits on it and just wiping all that off, and that will wipe a very translucent layer of MRP off as well. And if you're quick and careful, it will not go through the dull coat underneath. But if you get too much mineral spirits, even dull coat's not going to stand up to it. So But that's that's the way it goes. I mean, and I say that partly so that that I make mistakes. I get results I'm not happy with, and I have to redo stuff. And you shouldn't be afraid to. I mean, even if it seems really gnarly, I mean, an exhaust stain is a high penalty operation in my opinion, because if it looks wrong, I mean, it's right there in everybody's face. And so I really want them to look authentic, and so I was willing to erase and do again, and because of my own compulsive nature, I've probably pulled that off in some situations where most people would have said, "Hell no, I'm not even. It's fine the way it is," and I'm just passing that on so that you don't have to settle for that. So. Anyhow, I mentioned the engine before, and so we are now to the point where I want to give you guys a look at that. Well, before we do that, let's flip this over and look at the bottom real quick. We'll do the engine thing last. So, here we go. This is what the belly looks like. You can see just, the same stuff. MRP, brush paint the stripes, do the washes. And, you can see I'm trying to use complementary color washes. I use black on all these functional panel lines, removable panels, and then a darker version of the base color for everything else. Just trying to depict how the powder burns, the goop coming out of the oil and powder and gunk coming out of the breech in the ejection port, stained the wings. That was actually, there was generally more staining there than there was on the gun ports themselves. So did that. I did my trick of using my Mac valve on my airbrush with a very, very thin mixture of oil and mineral spirits to create the splattering from the wheels. And, like the way that looks. I did a lot of sanding on the invasion stripes back there underneath the tail, because I felt like they would have gotten rubbed on a lot by grass and whatever, because these guys were operating off of forward air bases that didn't have pavement for the most part. But by far one of the trickiest things was this giant streak that is characteristic with Spitfires. I don't know what the deal is, whether the ground crews are just slobs or these Merlins are a lot leakier than we think, but apparently oil collects at the back of the engine bay, and when the thing is going 350 miles an hour, it gets sucked out through the panel line joint there and makes this characteristic long, streaky, oily thing on the belly. Now, I'm a firm believer that airflow streaks and gravity streaks need to be straight. And it frustrates me no end with my own streaking that I just don't ever seem to really feel like I do a good job of getting them straight. And with these being so long and really needing to be straight down the center line of the fuselage to look authentic, I kind of had to invent a technique. And what I did basically was I just grabbed a sanding stick because it was thick and easy to position, and I just held it on there and used it as a ruler and used this magic brush. If you don't have these, you got to get you some. Matt McDougall introduced me to this brush. This is called the Wisp, and you can see why it's great for streaking. And so what I would do is just hold my sanding stick / ruler and just run the brush along it with the right amount of oil paint on it to create the streaks that I wanted. And then I had just, maybe a little bit of tuning up to do with a really small brush, but I felt like that worked out really good. I was finally happy with a set of streaks for once in my life, and pleased that I was able to come up with a method that let me do that. So anyway, the thing that I was talking about with the landing gear, I don't want to belabor that too much, but basically what happened is these things are engineered so that they can really only go in there one way. But I somehow managed to have a little bit of a misalignment in one, and anyway, I fixed it, because even after it was all screwed in and I could not unscrew it, because knowing that these landing gear are never going to come out to be changed over to the gear up configuration that Tamiya, in my opinion, ridiculously allows you to do. Anyway, what they want you to do is put these little B-2 bomber shaped plates in there with magnets, so that you can pop those out and then unscrew the landing gear. Well, because I was never gonna, I knew the landing gear's never coming out of there, I glued those things in. So when I discovered that the landing gear was what had happened, what it was that had happened was this one was correct, but this one was leaning over to the inboard just a little too much, and there was no way I was getting in there to loosen that screw at that point without doing some seriously medieval stuff, and medieval, anyway, whatever, it was going to be ugly. And so I just ended up pushing on this hard enough that it popped over into the correct position, and yes, I was much, much relieved. So anyway, that's the belly of the beast. Let me flip this thing back over and finish up by talking about the engine, okay? And part of the reason why I wanted to save this till last is because I have to do something on camera that I've been dreading doing, which is remove the engine panels. And part of the reason why, I'm anybody that wants to build one of these and wants to know whether or not the engine panels can be removed may want to know this, but the guy who's going to have this in his library soon needs to know. So, Steven, this is for you. So, to get these off of here, and I'm going to move the camera a little bit here so that I can get at this a little bit more effectively. Anyway, so what you have to do is put your fingers back here in front of the tail feathers, and then grab the propeller and twist and pull. Hopefully not twist and shout. There's a poly cap in the propeller. You can see it gets kind of wiggly, and you should be able to, it's basically just a press fit, but it's not loose. You can see it isn't just flying off of there. Anyway, pull it forward a bit. You can see about a millimeter and a half or two. Then you should be able to just pick up the front of this top cover, lift it right off, and you can see it's got a couple of tabs in the back that fit in a couple of slots here, and then it's got this little tab underneath the front end of it. Don't do what I did and mistakenly chop that off and have to put a new one on there. Anyway, that's what holds the top cover on. Then what you have to do to get this side cover off, because it has to now come out from underneath the exhaust stubs. Look, this is not the sort of thing you want to be doing when you're drunk, for sure. Probably really not very often at all. Anyway, all you have to do is just kind of get it loose, and it needs to basically come out from the bottom. Just like that. So it'll just slide out from underneath those exhaust stubs. So this enables me to talk for a minute or 20 about the engine, which was a lot of fun, a lot of work. You can see As good as Tamiya does, they leave a lot of detail unsaid. And I spent a lot of time studying reference photos of Merlins to figure out what I wanted to do here and to figure out a strategy. But again, they give you a pretty good base for doing all of this. And again, it's a lot of lead wire, a lot of little pieces of brass tubing to make fittings for the ends of hoses and things. I also use this stuff called hairline tubing, which is a micro size vinyl tubing that is used by the fly tying guys to make lures, and they have 3 sizes that are smaller than the standard vinyl tubing that comes in a lot of Tamiya kits, if you're familiar with that. It's about a 1 millimeter diameter tubing, and so that stuff is fantastic because it's super easy to cut. And I don't know if you'd be able to see it or not, but what you do is you just slip it over the end, cut a little piece, slip it over the end of your lead wire that represents your hose or your cable or whatever. And after you insert the lead wire into the hole that you've drilled for it and super glued it, you just slide that little piece of tubing up to the end where it's supposed to be, and then put a little bit of ultra thin super glue on that. And boom, you got a little tube fitting on the end. And I did a whole hour-long video segment on how I do all of this detail wiring and cabling, if you're really interested in that. So I'm not going to just go super duper into all of that. But this is also a point to talk about something that that ended up wrapping up a lot of time and ultimately proved to be worthwhile, but I really wondered for a bit if it was going to be. Tamiya has done a pretty good job of engineering all of this business with these engine covers. But as I looked around on the internet, one thing I saw was that a lot of models had a little bit more gap than I wanted. What I mean by that is you basically have like 8 gaps to worry about here. The one between each panel, so you've got one here, you got one here, and then you got the 2 on the opposite side, and then you've got the gap at the back end of each of those panels between it and the fuselage. Now the dry fitting all this is not super easy. It wasn't as easy as I had hoped it would be, given that they all are supposed to be able to stay on there with magnets. Okay, this is that Tamiya system where they give you the little photo etch steel pieces that you glue on, and then the little neodymium magnets that are supposed to hold all this stuff in place, along with the tabs that I showed you. But it doesn't quite work out that perfectly because they don't really want to stay on there super good and blah blah blah. And anyway, my fundamental thing was that I planned to glue the left side and the chin piece on permanently. And so in all of my fiddle farting around, I discovered that the gap was a little bit bigger than I wanted it to be. And part of the reason was I created a problem for myself, because when I fitted this panel and the chin piece on, I wanted a really nice tight gap down here and also on top. And I probably made it tighter than I should have been. I think basically Tamiya, have figured out how much of a gap they wanted all the way around, and they assumed that would be equal. And so by taking up about half of that intended gap right here, what I did to myself was make the corresponding gaps on this side quite a bit bigger, big enough to where they were really offensive. And the only way to solve that was to, as you can see, basically enlarge this panel. You can still see the styrene, that's evergreen strip, that is added to 3 of the 4 edges of this panel. And that was a lot of work and fiddling and fitting and freaking out, and but hey, it all ended up being okay. It was hard, but I feel like it was worthwhile. It worked out well because I feel like I have a pretty tight gap all the way around there, and it worked out okay. So at any rate, I don't, that's honestly something that's pretty nutty, and I would not necessarily expect a lot of model makers to want to go to that length, but if you are as fanatical about gaps and panel fit as I am, and you're building one of these things, then that may be useful information for you. At any rate, I am going to try and reinstall these so that Steven can see how this works in reverse. So we'll see how that goes, and I'll kind of talk through it as I go. Maybe, I don't know, we'll see. But anyway, that's basically the end of the presentation.
Yeah, this is a little motherfucker right here to get this panel positioned correctly so that it comes up from underneath. And I'm sure if I wasn't so goddamn clumsy, that it wouldn't be nearly as bad. So yeah, somebody with properly working fingers will not make such an abortion out of this. But yeah, for me, this is not cool or fun. Okay, that's the hard one. Yay! Now this one just drops on there. And you push the front of it down like that. Then you grab the thing and push the propeller back in place.
Okay, there we go. And I don't have much battery left, so I gotta shut up quick. But that's it. That is my grand Spitfire adventure that has occupied so much of the last 10 months or so of my life. I am stoked to be done, but I'm also stoked about the way it turned out. This is by far one of the most complex projects I've done, both in terms of detailing and in terms of painting and weathering. And I'm happy. I'm stoked. I think all the work paid off. Hopefully you guys agree. I guess we'll see. Anyway, if you've stuck with me throughout all this, I really appreciate it. And as always, much love.